Hello friends on the channel All Tools. Ru. Artem Lebedev is with you. Today, we are going to talk about milling cutters. Not specifically about each one, because we will not stuff each cutter into one roller, and even into one of 10 rollers. Because sometimes you can do this with the same cutter. Let's take for example, let's build a milling cutter into a table, and, in addition to the fact that we have a milling cutter built into a table, for example, make it rotary. That's it. We have a million combinations right there, so we definitely won't be able to consider all of them in one video. Today, we are going to talk about a manual edge milling cutter and a large milling cutter. To understand in which situations we will need a light edge milling cutter, and in which situations it will not cope at all. Or we do not need, for example, a large milling cutter, but we only need an edge cutter, and vice versa. We will do with a large milling cutter there in some situations, because a large one can replace a small edge milling cutter. It is precisely these questions that we will analyze today. Let's go. Let's start with an edge milling cutter made of cutters with a pitch in diameter of 8 millimeters. Please note, the diameters are not very large. We can say the maximum. Here in this kit, we have a milling cutter with a diameter. I'll tell you for sure now. The diameter is 31 and 8 millimeters, 32 millimeters. Edge milling cutter, why doesn't he like large diameters? Yes, you can buy an edge milling cutter with a submersible base, and insert more or less large diameters of work with two hands there. But the whole trick of the edge cutter is that it is convenient for them to work with one hand. This is the most popular kit. Why? Because we have to radii. In principle, these radii are enough for us to start there, for example, to assemble some furniture from shields. We take furniture boards, we dissolve the circular. Then it's up to the milling cutter to fix it, remove the facet, maybe make some kind of radius and so on and so forth. This is already a fraser. And such a set will be quite enough for us. Then we will already understand whether, for example, we need to buy a quarter more, or it will be the 12th collet. But again, we will return to it now. For what it is needed there. There are a lot of different profiles of milling cutters. Because if I explain now what and how, and this goes on with us, as I have already said, for an eternity. Therefore, on the basis of this kit, we will now consider an edge milling cutter. So, we have straight groove cutters. They are different in length. For submersible milling cutters, we can take longer. For edge cutting long cutters, this is, well, if two bases can be used. Again, we look at the dive. So, according to the groove cutters, with this cutter, we can make a small quarter. We can make a groove. Loaded, passed, loaded, passed. We can't do that with a milling cutter like this. No, well, we can if we dip it like this, diagonally, neatly like this, because if we just dip it down, we will run into the body of the cutter. There are cutters where the knives are. They go slightly on top of each other. Then we can dive completely. A little bit plunged, passed, and so on. Next, there are similar cutters, but they are not grooved, they are purely overtaking. Basically, they come with a bearing, for example, with an upper bearing arrangement, but they are very similar. But they have an important point. These end faces of the milling cutter, they are not sharpened. According to the radii, there are overrunning radius cutters here. In theory, there are no standards here, for example, so that your facade has a certain radius and that's it. Here is the edge of the facade, it can generally be straight. A small facet can be removed. There are no rules here. Which one you like, which radius you like more, do this. Probably many milling cutters with bearings have paid attention. This is very important for an edge milling machine. Basically, you need to take it with bearings. This is very convenient. Without bearings, we have it, well, when we need to make grooves or any connections. Here, yes, here it is already of course. Here the meaning of the edge milling cutter is already lost, so to speak. It's already better to work with immersion. Why bearings? In general, the whole work of a manual milling cutter comes down to the fact that we are running into something. Whether it's a parallel stop, whether it's a bearing, whether it's some kind of a stop, whether it's a copy sleeve or something else. We still rest. On the weight, it's impossible to work like this just like this. I will tell you a little about safety at once. The milling cutter always rotates in one direction, and it must be driven against the direction. He eats this way, and we lead him this way. If we lead in the opposite direction, where he is going, he will lead us. It will pull out, and that's it. It will simply be knocked out at breakneck speed, and especially it does not concern the edge milling cutter, but a manual submersible with a 12th collet, with a large milling cutter. If you had it in your hands, if it was in the table. In any case, do not neglect this rule. This is the most basic. The rest, and in principle everything is in the operating instructions, there are safety precautions. Well. Read it. This is very important, because at first I didn't think. When I first built the milling cutter into the table, and started milling facades like this. I almost finished milling. I think I'll come back and finish milling, as this board pulses. And my fingers went through this recess of the foot, so the kick hit. I hold my fingers in my hand like this and think whether they are there or not. That's how I open it, exhaled, and remembered it for the rest of my life. When milling in a circle, pay attention to the fact that when passing through the end face, we will have a small pull-out like this here. It will pull out the wood. When we go further, the whole thing will be smoothed out for us. Why am I saying this? So that you don't start, for example, from the very corner. From here, you will walk carefully through everything. Then you will go around in a circle, and here in this part, you will again break out. But you will not remove it anymore. According to the speed of the milling cutters, the smaller the milling cutter, the higher the speed, but pay attention. Usually the whole thing is spelled out everywhere. How much we need to give turns to this or that milling cutter. We hold him, we press him. We don't have this boltanka, everything is convenient. For example, we can fill up the submersible a little bit, because when we go submerged, we go half the base. And we have a weight distribution on both hands. And then it needs to be leveled already, especially when it's a big heavy milling machine. You don't feel it that way there. Without the bearing, we would need to use something, some kind of stops. Copying parts, and not only in the case, is one of the most frequent, at least to me, procedures encountered. Milling cutters are not cheap. You will cut the chipboard once, you will cut it twice, and the third time, you will have chips, because the milling cutter is blunted. Yes, the milling cutter is stupid, but the chipboard is as fast as possible. I'm going to show you a mural like this. A milling cutter that has seen a lot. Why did I choose this one? Probably, you paid attention. There are already all sorts of different screws. It's terrible, of course, and I don't use it anymore. The trick is that there are replaceable knives. You take knives specially for chipboard, they go much longer. There's a different alloy. It is much harder and works much longer. Knives are not so expensive. Then we turn these knives over, and it turns out quite profitable. Again, there are knives with sharpening on top so that we can work with immersion or produce a quarter. There are also simple flat ones, without any cut. Now with a milling cutter for a few passes. Of course, it is better to remove excess material with a jigsaw because there is less dust. Although there is a dust outlet there, but it takes so-so from the side. This is when we immerse it so that our milling cutter does not clog. In this way, you can also align a part, for example, even a chipboard. They took it with a jigsaw, cut it off, a straight surface, applied it and did everything without Skolchikov. Why not? Bevels, curves, any curly details, everything firm and two. Then there is a submersible milling cutter built into the table. I'll tell you right away, don't be scared. Yes, this is a specialized table, already made at the factory. But you can make yourself a simple one from an ordinary countertop. I had a table made of a tabletop. I cut it off a little from behind, and from this cut, I made myself a parallel stop, and clamped everything with a clamp on both sides. There was nothing else there, but it worked exactly the same, well, almost exactly the same as this table. It was just not very convenient to reconfigure there, it was a little longer. And by the way, I also did dust removal there. We can use from mini to maxi cutters, the maximum possible in the milling cutter. And the next point is that dust removal works much better. In such a situation, we can use milling cutters without bearings, which is also much more convenient. Previously, the same radius cutters. Let's take a straight groove cutter without a bearing. We'll install it now. This is also a colletate for us. Now we'll put it on and show you what you can do with it by installing a conventional milling cutter in the table. Fraser, if you're interested, I have a 3612C Makita there. Here we have an emphasis. The emphasis is needed in order to start milling a part that we, well, for example, are not very convenient. We only need to mill one side. In order to mill normally, we rest and have already gone. This is if suddenly we have some kind of curved detail. In some situations it is inconvenient for us to work with a parallel focus. Here we can make a quarter, a groove, and a jointing. All this with one milling cutter. Now I can regulate the disclosure, but if we make a homemade table, we of course may not have such a function. Especially if we do it quickly, so long as it starts functioning with us. And with large cutters, I used these disposable MDF panels. We thereby align the general plane. We have a milling cutter that comes out as much as we need, and the rest of us closes evenly. We don't have details falling through. I would use the sacrificial panel in some situations, even with a specialized table. So, we have made a small sample, and we can continue to do as much as we need, as much as we like. The next moment. We're going to make a groove now. We need to lower the cutter a little bit. And by the way, guys, when you push through, your first hand is here in the access zone, you see everything. But in the back, especially when we make elements like this, we make blind grooves, we can simply miss this moment. That's why the pusher was invented. You can make it yourself. As you can see, there is nothing complicated. This is generally the simplest, nothing special. Now we have it not just a detail, but a called detail. We can insert anything into this groove. Then we can align the part, also make a prefugavka, for example, for gluing. It is clear that we will not walk as a reismus or a wide jointer, but as a mini jointer. But we have a mini fuganok. We take out the cutter up. The milling cutter is at the top. Next, what do we need for this? The left cheek should be slightly forward, as much as we need to eat. That eat is regulated by lining details. There are special slots in the parallel stop, where they are inserted, and the left cheek moves away. What is possible in a manual milling table? You can just glue on one side some thin material of 2, 3, 5 millimeters, as much as we need. We bring it to the milling cutter, and the milling cutter should not touch it. Almost should not hurt, just a little. Do not forget to de-energize everything. The milling cutter should not be too far away. If it's too far away, we'll just bump into the cheek. So, now we see the movement of the milling cutter. This shouldn't happen. So, we have a part with a very uneven plane. These are our flaws. Now we are going to remove them by the method of jointing. Now I want to show the preliminary result that we got. Pay attention, a flat plane. Then we have an unevenness. And here it is the transition. That's the thickness, the moment. The same thickness that we have here at the beginning. We get a deepening here. We go to the milling machine, the material is removed. Further, since we have the material removed so that the part does not fall through, we have it supported by an elongated cheek. If we had two cheeks in the same plane, we would have milled. We would have a gap between the left cheek and the part. And we would have the details, so the back would have failed, and we would have been less photographed. We would have turned out to be nonsense. That's it, literally in 2 passes, we got the perfect surface. Then we can use large milling cutters, for example for strapping. Now I'm going to insert you shots of kitchens that are made, well, approximately with such a cutter. I even used a slightly simpler milling cutter. To motivate you, what can be done with the milling table. These are the kitchens you can get. They look very, very cute. It is perfect both for yourself and, for example, to make a kitchen already for sale. The most important thing is to do it all carefully. How to make a facade, I can leave you a link in the description under the video. I show there how to make a facade using a conventional milling table. Come in, look, there will be a link in the description. In order for us to make something larger, we need a milling cutter in a larger diameter. A milling cutter that already has mass. For example, the same milling cutter that we are using now, only in such a large size. Here is such a milling cutter, it will take more at a time, because a small milling cutter, it will dig in. And this milling cutter will work. If we make half of the milling cutters, the milling cutter begins to dig into the material. You need to take less than half of the food, there you need to look at the milling cutter, as it begins to choke, does not begin to suffocate. You do not need to take a lot of food. The 12th collet expands our opportunity. For example, multi-profile cutters. The 8s also have them, but they will still be small cutters. There are several cutters in one mill at once. However, this milling cutter costs just like several cutters. Here again, we need to look at our tasks, what we will do. Next, let's take such counter-profile cutters. They repeat each other's profile. The trick is that we can connect the boards using a spike groove, without using glue, for example, just assemble something. Or occasionally, when we use solid wood, we can use it and glue it together. In general, if you take a good fright, for example, if you take a pine tree, just like we did now, 2 flat planes, and you glue, for example, with glue-tight bond 2, you will not tear the wood at the place of gluing. You will tear it apart nearby. If you tear it apart, you will hammer it with anything, with a hammer, with an axe, it doesn't matter. With solid wood, for example with oak, the situation may be different. You can fine-tune it, but there will be some error somewhere a little bit. Then, of course, you will have such a situation that you will break. Not such strength will be, you can use these cutters. But I have never used it. I tried to do a good job of prefugovit, so that everything was clear. There are a lot of such types of counterprofile cutters. And it is possible under the lining, in the same way is done with counterprofile cutters. Then the floorboard, then what can I do? You can even go so far as to make all sorts of different tubs there, a million different cutters. And all this is mainly on the 12th collet. Everything that is more interesting, everything that is bigger, goes to the 12th collet. But with the figure 8, of course, there are also a lot of interesting frescoes, but still they are more edged. About the edging. In the same way, it is possible to perform edge functions on the table. I'll say more. Small details that can be held in your hands are more convenient to handle on the table. If there are more details, then of course you need an edge milling cutter. Especially when we process some kind of curved countertop, for example. In the end, what will you have? You will start with a large milling cutter with a collet 12. You will start working with them with 8s at first, because it is better not to take them with 2 pieces at once. Because here is such a 2-piece, to insert into the milling cutter and drive. In principle, this is more or less a milling cutter, but I probably wouldn't even risk inserting a milling cutter like this. And going to hold a milling cutter in my hands. Although it's still normal on the first profiles, and when this kind of baldon sticks out from below, the details from below. It's already scary here. Many cutters cannot be used at all. And this or not. Many milling cutters are not for manual use, they are already for large machines. I've already gone a little further. To pull out the milling cutter in order to make an edge, and then insert the milling cutter back, it will be very inconvenient, very long, and you will still come to the fact that you have a large and powerful milling cutter with a 12th collet will stand in the table. And you will still have a manual milling cutter. You will come to this. We start with a milling cutter on the 12th collet, then we already buy a manual milling cutter for ourselves. And this bundle is, well, it's like an inseparable one, like we take a jointer reismus. It is also possible to use the milling cutter as a reismus. Basically, why is such a milling cutter made for slabs? There is not always such a large size of the reismus, it may not even exist at all, because there are huge slabs. We insert this milling cutter, the milling cutter and a line. We make a plane in the same way. Yes, it will take longer, of course, to tinker. Not in a single pass and so on, but the task will be completed. There are also submersible milling cutters, in which you can insert a maximum of an 8th collet. You can also work with them full of cutters. It can also be adapted into a table. And in the same way, we will have many different tasks, but we will not be able to use large cutters. Therefore, it is better to immediately purchase with the 12th collet, with constant electronics, so that everything was to the maximum. Because this is the first and main milling cutter, it's with you for a long time, believe me. That's where this video came to an end. I tried to explain as much as possible the moments from my experience, what I myself encountered. With some moments when, for example, a bunch of cutters in front of me, which ones to take. Here is a set that will suit you to begin with. This set of cutters is perfect. Do not rush to recruit some incomprehensible random cutters that will be lying around. For example, for splicing into a spike groove, these Christmas trees are all sorts of different. And these are these cutters, they are the ones that create such a Christmas tree, not a Christmas tree, here are such stacks, so to speak. This is in order to splice the boards along the length. The length of the board to splice is still something to do. In order to face the board, this is generally a separate story here. Look, there in the video I'm telling you about the facade, how to face what to put, where. If you just take and rush into the pool with your head, there will be a lot of information, absolutely half of which you don't need. Maybe it will come in handy sometime, and maybe not. Therefore, take the task, do not be afraid, grab it, say, yes, I can. Even if you don't know if you can or not, you can. Go ahead, do it, everything will work out. I did it, it's checked. That's it, this video has come to an end. Artem Lebedev was with you. See you soon. Bye bye.